Welcome to B&B Movie Reviews. This week, we let the spice flow with Dune Part 2. We take a ride with Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien as they build their love and bust in some ghosts in the frozen empire.
Godzilla and Kong create a new empire, and Dev Patel seeks revenge. Stay right there. B&B is coming up next.
Your blood comes from dukes and great houses. We don't have that here. Here, we're equal. Men and women alike. What we do for the benefit of all.
Well, I'd very much like to be equal to you.
Paul Muad'Dib Usul. Maybe you could be from it. Maybe I'll show you the way.
The romance between Paul and Chani blossoms, but does fate have something more for Paul in the sequel, Dune Part 2? Bryan.
Brad.
When the first film came out and it just ended, there was some frustration about it not being a complete movie. Yeah. But here we are now. Yeah. Are you satisfied with the totality of Dune Parts 1 and 2?
It's funny you say, are we satisfied with the totality? Because even when we get to the end of this movie, there feels like there needs to be more story that needs to be told. But I love this movie.
Well, there's a bunch more books after this one. They very much can. And I feel like they should do a sequel. Like, I don't know if I'll be satisfied with this story until we at least get Dune Messiah. But I don't want to get too far off on that tangent.
No, not yet. But I know, like, you felt that, and we had this conversation off air, where you felt like Dune Part 1 felt like a complete story. But you kind of had, I know you loved it.
Like, to me, when I got done with Dune Part 1, I feel like I was in the minority, where I felt like actually there was a complete arc for Paul. Yes. You can imagine at the end of Dune Part 1 where Paul will go in Part 2. And now we get to see where he goes. And, it doesn't necessarily go in a great place for the rest of the galaxy.
No. But one thing that I do love about this movie is how it basically almost picks up the second after the first movie ends, and we get off and racing with Paul, now that he's with the Fremen people, and how that story continues, his relationship with the Fremen. I really want to talk a lot about Denis Villeneuve, because this movie, I think from a filmmaking standpoint, from a technical standpoint, and we talked about this off air, when you look at all the different departments that are working in tandem with this movie, when it comes to the cinematography, when it comes to the sound, when it comes to the set design, the costuming, everything, it just feels like everything is just top notch.
It feels like a movie. I feel like in the last batch of years, we've been seeing a lot of stuff, and I think a lot of this is as a result of streaming. But we're seeing a lot of like TV-like productions, right? Well, Dune Part 2 is a movie. 5 minutes into this film, just absorbing the scale of it, I was in awe of it. And it's been a while since I felt that way sitting in a theater where the screen just enveloped my life, and I want more of that.
Yeah, I definitely want more of that, and it feels like Denis is definitely going to give us more of that with, kind of like where this story is kind of going. But again, going to a lot of the different characters and the performances, how did you feel about, like, we saw the clip with Paul and Chani, and then we get more with Rebecca Ferguson, with his mother, and a lot of the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah, I think, obviously it's Paul's story, and Timothée Chalamet, excels as Paul. Like, I really like his interpretation of that character. Zendaya as Chani is almost kind of like the secret protagonist of this film. And her character is probably the most different from the novels. And, I think they made some necessary changes to make her character engaging, and also I think maybe some of the political and philosophical elements really rest with some of those changes that they made with Chani's character, and I appreciated them. Like I do wonder how people watch this film, how they watch parts 1 and 2. How do they come away feeling about Paul? And I have a feeling about Paul, but it's based on also having, checked out some Dune Messiah and some of the follow-up novels.
Okay.
And I really want that story to continue so that the rest of the audience can truly get what Frank Herbert was doing with this story.
What's your rating for this one?
Oh man, I mean, this is like I said, it's a movie. We give things either a B+ if we love it or a B- if we don't, and I absolutely loved it. It's got to be a B+.
Same for me, man. This is easily a B+, one of the best movies I've seen this year. So we're going to move on to our next film. Our next film is a romantic thriller from Rose Glass, starring Kristen Stewart as Lou, a gym manager who falls in love with Jackie, a bodybuilder passing through town. But when Jackie gets caught up with Lou's criminal family, can their love endure through lies, deceit, and cover-ups? So now we have Love Lies Bleeding.
A very different movie.
Very different movie. This is from Rose Glass, who I believe this is her second film coming off of Saint Maud, which I didn't watch.
Yeah.
But the thing that I really liked about this movie was the 80s aesthetic. Like when this movie first starts and you see Jackie go into that gym, like you could feel the sweat and the must and everything.
I actually feel like this movie was made in the 80s. It practically looks like a replica of the films of this era.
Yeah.
And the cast absolutely helps in that. The production design helps in that as well.
Yeah.
But like what this film does so well is visually expose the internal life of these characters and playing a little bit with some magical realism, which was a great surprise.
Yeah, I wasn't really expecting that element of the story, but it's funny how it's like an onion. It's like as the movie starts to go along and you see there's certain shots and certain scenes and certain moments, you start to peel back the layer and you start thinking to yourself like, okay, where is this movie going? And then it goes to a place that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but if you go back and think about it, you kind of realize like they were kind of setting a lot of that stuff up in the beginning leading up to some of those moments.
So the climax isn't necessarily as big as a surprise as you might initially think.
If you're really following.
Yeah. It's a brutal movie though. You got to go into Love Lies Bleeding really focusing on that word bleeding, because when the blood flows like the spice in Dune, it does so quite intensely.
Yeah, the supporting cast too. Now, we talk about Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien, and this is a star-making performance for Katie O'Brien. But I loved Ed Harris, Dave Franco, who I forgot was even in this movie, and even Jenna Malone, which they play a really pivotal, especially Jenna Malone's character plays a pivotal part with how Kristen Stewart's character of Lou, it kind of put a lot of stuff that's dealing with Jenna Malone is really pushing Lou's character forward.
It's pretty complicated. I think the performances are complicated and the characters are complicated, and the movie doesn't fail them. The script doesn't fail them.
It doesn't.
And when we get to the climax of this movie and the last few shots of this film, you got to sit with them for a while and really determine how you feel about everybody involved. And, like what is the philosophy of Love Lies Bleeding?
Yeah, you're right. What's your rating for this?
Another great movie, one of my favorites of the year, B+.
Yeah, I agree. I have to agree with you on this one. This was definitely a B+. Like I said, I love the aesthetic. I love the performances. Katie O'Brien, I can't wait to see what she does more in her career coming off of this movie. So definitely a B+ for me. So yeah, those are our thoughts for Dune Part 2 and Love Lies Bleeding. When we return from the break, we are going to take a look at Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. You stay right there.
When times get dark, we can't see the help that's all around us. Let 211 be your guiding light for help with food, healthcare, and other resources.
211, how can I help you?
Call 211 or visit 211.org. 211, get connected, get help.
And someone says, you need a bone marrow transplant, those are just not words you want to hear.
I got a call that it was the best match.
It was one of the best days of my life. I'm so happy that you're okay.
I just want to say thank you for the second chance at life.
Thousands of patients need a donor like you. Learn how you can help at BeTheMatch.org.
Gross. It's the Hell's Kitchen sewer dragon.
Hold on to your ass!
TV Spangler, you stay inside this car.
I have a ghost to bust.
All right, that was cool.
The Spangler family have gotten themselves well acquainted in the big city as the new Ghostbusters as they chase down the Hell's Kitchen sewer dragon in Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Brad, Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire. So they're back in New York City. You know, they came Afterlife. They were out, I forget where they were, somewhere.
Middle America somewhere. Yeah. Ghostbusters belongs in New York City.
Yeah, so we're back in New York City,
Are
man.
we though? Are we in New York City?
Or are we just in the
like a lot of sets?
Yeah.
I don't want to jump right into a negative, but I feel like this movie is so claustrophobic. And I think that's where you see the constraints of its budget. But I never feel like I'm on the streets of New York City.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing about the movie. I think outside of maybe like the opening with like from the clip that we saw with the chase of the Hell's Kitchen sewer dragon, when you are kind of like going through the streets of New York.
The car is anyway.
Yeah, the car. Yeah, well, that's true too. The car is, but that's usually where we get to see most of it. But then everything else feels like it's in buildings or feels like it's on
What I
sets.
loved about the first two Ghostbusters is that you would cut away to like random people experiencing ghosts in New York City, and we have very little of that. We're really glued to the core cast, and I found that a little bit frustrating.
It's funny too, man, because going into this movie, I enjoyed Afterlife, but coming into Frozen Empire and seeing that we were coming back to New York City, I'm looking at the first two movies and how those movies are really tied to the city of New York. Like New York is Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters is New York. So now that we're back, this felt like it could have been a proper sequel to those first two movies. But then I go to tone, and we talked a little bit about this as far as like the tone that those first two movies had, and then kind of like where we're at with Frozen Empire, with like the way those first two movies, and it was a different era back then.
Sure, it was a different era. I mean, the first two Ghostbusters, especially the first Ghostbusters, is a pretty perverted comedy, right? And I don't necessarily expect some of that perversion to remain in a sequel in 2024, but I do expect a lot of comedy, and I expect a lot of absurdity. And I think what you see in both Afterlife and Frozen Empire is a lot of reverence for the original films. Like, these are filmmakers who were children when the first two came out. You know, I think a lot of us when we were kids, we watched this, we were like, this is serious business. And now they're treating it as like serious business. And I don't want that in my Ghostbusters.
Yeah, it feels like throughout this movie, they lost a little bit of that fun aspect that we kind of got in those first couple of movies.
I think there are pops of comedy that work. You know, I like Patton Oswalt a lot in this film as the librarian in the library within the library. I think Kumail Nanjiani as the fire master is exceptional. Even like, you know, when like Bill Murray comes back for a few shots here and there, he's pretty darn good. He falls right into Venkman mode, and I like it. I just would have liked more of it.
Yeah, that was the thing too, because I like the fact that you're bringing in the new Ghostbusters and bringing in kind of like the OG crew, and then they're kind of working together. I wish that we could have gotten a little bit more of the original Ghostbusters, because I mean, to be honest with you, I don't even know how invested I am. I love Paul Rudd and Carrie Coon. But I don't know how invested, and McKenna Grace, who carries a lot of the kind of the A plot in this movie.
She has this entire plot that's apart from the rest of the film with a ghost-like character.
Which I thought was a little interesting.
Emphasis on the word little.
I
don't know. It did not work for me at all. And like Finn Wolfhard has nothing to do with this.
Nothing to do.
Paul Rudd's trying to be a good stepdad, and there's some bits there that work, but I don't like. It's just not the Ghostbusters for me. Now I know a lot of people really enjoyed Frozen Empire, and I'm super happy for them, but you're just gonna have to count me out.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same boat as that as well. What's your rating for this one?
Well, I got to go B-, not a fave.
Yeah, I think I'm right there with you. This is a B- for me. It just didn't really live up to my expectations that I was looking forward to as far as seeing them come back into New York City. But I mean, there's a lot of Ghostbusters fans out there, so your mileage may vary. So those are our thoughts on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. When we return, we take a look at those two titans, Godzilla and Kong. Stay right there.
Jason, let's go see your room.
How is it? Is it good?
Every 2 minutes, a woman in the U.S. is diagnosed with breast cancer. And that's why when others look away, we lean in. We're fighting alongside patients because we know one moment can change everything. With your help, more moments of hope are possible. Join our fight. Save lives.
When Kong invades Godzilla's territory, Kong tries to reason with him to get his help against a bigger threat in the silly but fun Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. Bryan, I know you're a big fan of the original Godzilla films, and you like the 2014 film and King of the Monsters. We've gone in a bit of a different direction with the last two.
Yeah.
How are you feeling about the tone of Godzilla Kong: The New Empire?
It's funny, man. Coming into this movie, and we talked about it coming in, and you kind of know how I feel. Within this Monsterverse, the legendary Monsterverse movies, there's 5 films, and I'm more in tune with the tone that they had with the first 3 movies. And then since Adam Wingard has come in with Versus and now Godzilla Kong, I'm just like, this just isn't my jam. But going into this, I tried to kind of, change my, my train of thought. I had a lot of fun with this movie. It's goofy and silly as hell.
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah, it makes no sense logically.
Well,
with
Hollow Earth, Bryan. Like, once you're like, you got to accept the premise of Hollow Earth, and once you accept the premise of Hollow Earth, you just got to go with it, right? We've entered into the Fast and the Furious phase of the Godzilla and Kong movies, and I am here for it. It's extremely silly.
Yeah.
I do think that some of the human characters are not the most engaging, but that's okay because we're really here for the big ape, and this is Kong's movie, and there's massive sequences of this film where we're just with this ape, and he can't speak to us. We have to figure out what he's feeling, and we can. It's a great animated character.
You're right, and that's the one thing that I appreciate the direction that Adam Wingard took. And I was listening to some conversations that he had leading up to the movie, and he said that we were going to have some long extended sequences with just the Titans, with no humans. And we get that in this movie, and those are probably the most compelling parts of the movie, and they pull it off really, really well.
Yeah.
I think for me also, Godzilla Kong, you're right, it's a Kong movie. I want more Godzilla.
I hear you, and I would love more Godzilla as well. I mean, frankly, this could have been a 3-hour film, and I would have been perfectly happy. What we do see of Godzilla, he's trying to get supercharged over the course of this film. He's taking naps inside the Coliseum. I'm okay with all of that because it's really about Kong, trying to figure out where he comes from and his place in the world, or inside the world.
Inside the world.
And, you know, there's that little, like, small baby ape titan in this film, Zuko.
Zuko.
And when I was watching the trailers, I was like, who's this Jar Jar? I don't need this Jar Jar in my movie. And then it turns out he's the MVP.
He is. And you're so right. Watching the trailer, I was not really that taken by the character of Zuko. I was like, I don't know how this is going to play off. I'm not going to look forward to this. He comes into the movie, and he's a little rascal in this.
And
he's one of the best parts. And then when you start to see the relationship that he starts to build with Kong throughout the story, it starts to become a really endearing relationship.
He is a naughty kid. Like when we first meet him, like he's almost villainous. And like that very kind of childish aggression and how he directs it towards Kong equals some of the funniest moments I've seen in a theater this year.
Yeah. There's one surprising moment that we won't spoil here.
We're not gonna spoil it.
When it happens, it's like you just you just laugh out loud.
But like,
it's
you've
hilarious.
got like Rebecca Hall in this film, and Dan Stevens, and Bryan
Henry.
And I love these people, but there's nothing for them to do.
Absolutely nothing, except just to be kind of just exposition for.
Oh, and there's so much exposition. How do they get this exposition in their heads? No clue. I have no idea. They shouldn't have access to this knowledge at all, but they do somehow.
Which blows my mind. It's one thing that you called it Fast and Furious. To me, I look at the previous era of Godzilla as far as like the Showa era, which was from the original film all the way up through the 70s, where we had a lot of those kind of silly Godzilla movies.
But still some great ones.
And some great ones. I'm not.
Don't besmirch my Showa era.
I'm not. I love the Showa era. But it feels like that they're trying to make like a big budget Hollywood version of the Showa era.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm on board for that. But the tone has just kind of lost me a little bit.
I think some things work and some things don't. Honestly, like my hope is the success of Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. Don't pronounce the X. Do not pronounce the X. I hope that the success of this will encourage them to make more Godzilla Kong movies in which they're the main characters.
Yes.
Less screen time for the people.
Please, especially after seeing it in this movie, please. What's your rating for this?
I had a blast, B+.
Yeah, I can't say it's a good movie.
It's a good movie.
But I enjoy it. It's a B+.
Don't be all highfalutin on me.
You're right. I'm gonna bring it down. I'm sorry. All right, those are our thoughts on Godzilla Kong: The New Empire. When we return, Dev Patel in his directorial debut, Monkey Man. We'll take a look at that right after the break.
There's a blood shortage and we came up to Dead Lover's Point at midnight on Friday the 13th.
Lame.
Guess I'm gonna waste all this blood by dying in a predictable horror movie way.
50% of Americans like watching blood get spilled in horror movies, but only 3% donate it. When was the last time you donated blood?
If you need to do something to feel okay to drive, you're not okay to drive. Don't drive buzzed.
I don't want charity. What I need is a job.
This is King's. We just don't hire off the street. Where's your references? Your CV? Look, I don't have time for all this. You pass it or jao.
There's my CV. That's bleach. Chemical, oil. Give me the job no one wants to do. I'll do it.
Bobby asked for a job, but is there an ulterior motive in the bone-crunching directorial debut from star Dev Patel in Monkey Man? All right, Brad, Monkey Man. So Dev Patel, directorial debut. Jordan Peele saw this movie, said, no, wait. I need to release this in theaters. Was it worth the theater?
Heck yes. This movie is great. Dev Patel is a true stylist. I was shocked by how beautiful this movie was, and the way that he handled the action. Like it's not John Wick. It's a little more Paul Greengrass than I was expecting.
It's funny because Dev Patel, this being his directorial debut, he is bringing in a lot of influences, and you can see a little bit of the John Wick influences, but he's not trying to make a John Wick movie. And also some of the directors that he's worked with, and he has mentioned Danny Boyle because he worked with him on Slumdog Millionaire, and you could see and feel a lot of Danny Boyle in what he's doing visually.
The camera, and we get some like first person shots in this film, which are stunning. But like the camera is always on Dev Patel. Like the camera is the inner life of the character, and it is confusing at times, and it's like nauseous at times. It's upsetting, but it's always moving. It's super engaged. Like I could not look away even when I was in the middle of being, punched by a bunch of guys.
It's very kinetic. And going back to the John Wick comparisons, it's funny because a lot of times looking at those 4 John Wick movies, we kind of got desensitized by the action because, it's gotten to a point where I don't want to say it gets cartoony, but it's a type of kind of action that we kind of get a little bit, we separate ourselves, we remove ourselves. But with this, Dev Patel is bringing the pain and the anguish to a lot of the action and the violence, where it's not like the type of action where you watch and you're kind of rooting for it.
Yeah, I think what's great about the movie is that early on we understand that Dev Patel has gone through some sort of childhood trauma. We get a few flashes here and there, but we're not exactly sure. And the movie allows a lot of space for that story to reveal itself. So by the time you fully understand what's going on, you're in a different place than just like rooting for this guy to kick some butt.
No, absolutely. And I mean, going also back to Dev Patel, some of the themes in this movie where we're talking about revenge. We're talking about the idea of justice. What is justice?
We're talking about systemic corruption, right? Like this is actually a politically ferocious movie. There's a lot more going on in this film than I was expecting, and it's radical, and it's radical in every sense of that word. And when you get to the end and we have our climax, like, well, how satisfied are we with where all these characters end up? Like, is this vengeance? Is this justice?
And I like how the movie challenges us as an audience as far as like what is justice and what is vengeance, and are those two things one and the same? When do we look at it through the lens of Dev Patel, or like how all of that kind of interacts with each other? I thought it was fascinating.
And who should control the narrative, right? Dev Patel has talked about this being an anthem for the marginalized, and that's what elevates this movie above something like John Wick, right? And I'm not going to disparage John Wick.
No, never.
It's a masterpiece of action cinema. But this movie, I think, also kind of tricks the audience into thinking like, hey, you're here for some bloodshed, but actually we're going to slow things down for a bit. And the last few shots of this movie don't have you cheering, right? When that directed by Dev Patel card comes up, you're like, huh, how do I feel? A little bittersweet.
It is a very bittersweet type of ending, but ultimately a satisfying ending. Extremely satisfying. What's your rating for this?
One of the best films of the year. I put it up there with Dune Part 2 and Love Lies Bleeding. I loved it. B+.
Yeah, this is a B+ for me too. I think this is one of the best movies of the year. I love what he does, like you were saying, visually with the action, but also what he's trying to say thematically through the storytelling and the political aspects of this movie as well. So yeah, this is easily a B+ for me. So yeah, those are our thoughts on Monkey Man. So let's recap the movies that we talked about on this episode. We started with Dune Part 2. We gave that a B+ for me and Brad. Then we talked about Love Lies Bleeding. That is also a B+ for both of us. Then we go to Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Unfortunately, that one was a B- for both of us. Then we went to Godzilla Kong, The New Empire. That was a B+. A lot of fun with that one. And then Monkey Man, starring Dev Patel with the directorial debut. That is a B+ plus for both of us as well. So thank you for joining us on this latest episode of B&B Movie Reviews. Come be a part of the conversation. If you have questions, suggestions, feel free to email us at bnbmoviereviews@gmail.com. And with that, we will see you at the movies.